The vast chamber of the intergalactic justice tribunal stretched before Kale Vex like the mouth of some enormous cosmic predator, ready to swallow him whole. The circular platform where he stood was isolated, deliberately so, surrounded by an abyss of empty space before the tiered seating of judges and representatives from a dozen different civilizations. The light here was artificial and cold, designed to strip away any sense of comfort or safety. Kale wore restraint cuffs that hummed softly against his wrists, a constant reminder of his imprisoned state. His once pristine diplomatic uniform, the silver one marking him as Earth's senior envoy to the Galactic Congress, was torn and stained. 3 weeks of detention had left him gaunt, his dark hair unkempt, his brown eyes hollow with the weight of accusations he couldn't begin to comprehend. Above all others, the chief adjudicator sat in an elevated chair that seemed carved from a single piece of obsidian. Her name was Magistrate Holloway, a member of the ancient Rexian species whose elongated frame made her appear as though she might be made of crystalline structures rather than flesh. Her eyes fixed upon Kale with what might have been curiosity or disdain. It was impossible to tell with her kind. Beside her sat representatives from Earth's government, but they kept their distance, their faces carefully neutral. That absence of support cut deeper than any physical blade could have. Kale Marcus Vex. Magistrate Holloway's voice resonated through the chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell. You stand accused of the destruction of the colony world designation Epsilon 7, resulting in the deaths of over 2 million civilians across 3 separate species. You are further accused of orchestrating this genocide as part of a conspiracy to destabilize the Galactic Peace Accords. How do you answer to these charges? Kale had rehearsed his response countless times in his cell, but the words felt hollow now, insufficient against the weight of these accusations. I did not commit these acts, Magistrate. I was not even on Epsilon 7 during the time of the destruction. My whereabouts are documented. My communications, my movements, everything points to my innocence in this matter. He paused, gathering strength he wasn't sure he still possessed. I have dedicated my entire life to peace between our worlds. I could never perpetrate such an atrocity. Your words are moving. Ambassador Vex, another judge interjected, a being whose species Kale had never encountered before, whose skin seemed to shift colors like oil on water. However, we have irrefutable evidence linking you directly to the weapon systems that devastated that world. Communications bearing your signature, financial transactions traced to accounts in your name, and testimony from 3 separate witnesses placing you at the crime scene. The judge's form rippled as he spoke. The evidence is overwhelming. Kel's heart sank. False evidence, manufactured testimony. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame him. But who and why? The political implications were staggering. If Earth's diplomatic corps could be so easily compromised, so easily turned into a weapon against the galactic community, what did that mean for humanity's place among the stars? He felt the weight of not just his own life, but the reputation of his entire species settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing. The witnesses you mention, Kale said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. I request to face them directly. I have the right to confront my accusers. Magistrate Holloway's crystalline features seemed to harden further. Your request is noted. However, 2 of the 3 witnesses have requested protective custody, citing fear for their safety. The 3rd witness is currently being transported to this chamber and should arrive within the hour. Until then, you will be remanded to holding cell 7. Justice will proceed when all parties are present. The guards moved forward before he could protest further, their armored forms cutting off any possibility of resistance. They escorted him from the chamber through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each footstep echoing with finality. The holding cell was smaller than the one he'd occupied before, barely large enough to contain a sleeping platform and a waste receptacle. The walls were transparent on one side, allowing for observation, but preventing any real privacy. Kale sat on the platform and allowed his head to fall into his hands. Somewhere in the Nexus station, someone was preparing to testify against him. Someone who would either be lying or truly mistaken about his involvement. Either way, his life hung in the balance. He had no idea that in another chamber, in the quiet observation rooms reserved for high-level witnesses, A woman was preparing herself for an appearance that would change everything. She moved through the corridors of Nexus Station like a ghost, her movements graceful despite the obvious tension in her frame. Her name was Serafini Thorn, though that was not the name she had been born with. She was neither fully human nor fully alien, a hybrid born of a union between two worlds that had nearly gone to war decades earlier. Her skin carried the faintest luminescence, a pale blue undertone beneath human tan that marked her as something other. Her hair was raven black, but her eyes those betrayed her dual nature. One was the deep brown of her human mother, the other the violet of her crystalline father's people. Serafini had been brought to the station under guard, escorted by officials who treated her with a mixture of respect and caution. They had shown her evidence. They claimed linked Kale Vex to the destruction of Epsilon 7. They had coached her on what to say, how to present herself, what details to emphasize. But Serafini had spent the last 3 hours in her quarters staring at that evidence, turning it over in her mind, searching for inconsistencies, and she had found them. Mountains of them. The fabrication was masterful, she had to admit. Whoever had created this false narrative had gone to extraordinary lengths. But Serafini had spent the last 15 years working in archival research, studying the patterns of data manipulation, learning the subtle signatures that revealed when information had been altered or falsified. These documents bore all those signatures in abundance. Kale Vex was innocent, and Serafini knew exactly why she was being asked to lie about it. The question was whether she would. As she looked out at the stars visible through her chamber's viewport, Serafini found herself thinking back to a mission Kale had led 5 years prior, one that had taken him to the outer colonies where her own people lived in relative isolation. She had been there then, working as a cultural liaison, and she had come to know him not just as a diplomat, but as a person. They had shared countless conversations about the nature of peace, about the burden of maintaining connections between worlds. Somewhere during those months, she had fallen in love with him. Though neither of them had ever spoken of it, it was a love that could never be acknowledged in the rigid hierarchy of galactic politics, where such attachments were seen as compromising to one's objectivity and duty. And now she was being asked to send him to his death. The guards arrived to escort her to the tribunal chamber 30 minutes later. Serafini stood, adjusted her formal robes, and prepared herself for the most difficult moment of her life. As she walked through those corridors toward the chamber where Kale was awaiting her testimony, she made her decision. The truth, she knew, would cost her everything, but she could not live with any alternative. Kale was already standing on the witness platform when she entered the chamber. His eyes met hers across that vast space, and she saw the moment recognition dawned on his face. His expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and finally settled into something that looked like resignation. He thought she had come to condemn him. Serafini approached the testimony stand, placed her hand on the verification crystal, and prepared to make the choice that would bind them together, in ways neither of them could yet imagine. But first, she would have to survive what came next. The tribunal chamber fell silent as Serafini Thorn approached the testimony stand. Magistrate Holloway's crystalline eyes tracked her movement with what might have been curiosity, while the other judges and representatives shifted in their seats, their attention focusing entirely on this new rival. Kale remained motionless on the central platform, but Serafini could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. He knew her. Worse, he knew she was here to testify against him, and from the look in his eyes, he was trying to understand why. Serafini placed her hand on the verification crystal as instructed, feeling its cool surface pulse with a soft blue light beneath her fingers. The crystal would detect any direct falsehoods she spoke, a safeguard against perjury that existed across all galactic jurisdictions. It would not, however, detect selective truth or calculated silence. Serafini Thorn, Magistrate Holloway intoned, consulting the holographic display before her. Your credentials indicate you hold the rank of Senior Cultural Liaison with the Hybrid Council, and possess extensive experience in archival research and diplomatic mediation. You were present at the Epsilon 7 colony installation during the period in question, were you not? Seraphine's throat felt dry, and she had to consciously force her voice to remain steady. I was present at Epsilon 7 for 3 weeks prior to the incident. Yes, I was there conducting research into the colony's historical archives and meeting with cultural integration representatives. And during your time there, did you observe Ambassador Kale Vex at the colony installation? This was the moment. This was where she had to choose. The officials had coached her to say yes, to claim she had seen Kale meeting with suspicious individuals, discussing weapon systems and targeting protocols. They had prepared her with specific details about conversations she had never witnessed, about plans she had never heard discussed. The fabricated story was intricate, detailed, and would dovetail perfectly with the other false evidence they had constructed. It would seal Kel's fate with the certainty of a coffin lid closing. All she had to do was speak the lies they had put into her mouth. I need to clarify something before I answer that question, Magistrate, Serafini said carefully, feeling the verification crystal pulse beneath her palm as it registered her heartbeat accelerating. The evidence I was shown prior to this testimony contains significant inconsistencies and markers of data manipulation. The documents allegedly written by Ambassador Vex bear signatures of falsification. Someone has gone to considerable effort to fabricate a case against him. The chamber erupted. Judges began speaking over one another. The representatives in the galleries leaned forward in their seats, and Kel's head snapped up, his eyes finding hers across the space between them with an expression of stunned gratitude, mixed with concern. Magistrate Holloway raised one of her elongated appendages, and the noise died away with the force of absolute authority. Ms. Thorne, Holloway said, her eyes focusing with laser precision. You are aware that contradicting the official tribunal evidence carries severe penalties? You are aware that your own credibility is now in question? I am aware, Magistrate, Serafini replied, keeping her hand on the verification crystal. But my expertise is in detecting precisely this type of manipulation. I can demonstrate the specific points of falsification if the tribunal wishes to review the evidence more thoroughly. She could see the shock on the faces of several officials stationed near the judicial platform. They had clearly not expected her to deviate from the script they had provided. One of them, a severe-looking woman with dark hair and colder eyes than seemed natural, actually took a step forward before another official placed a restraining hand on her arm. That woman, Serafini had heard her name, was Counselor Maris Venn, was clearly the architect of whatever conspiracy had constructed this frame, and by deviating from the planned testimony, Serafini had just declared herself an enemy to that person's agenda. Your assertions are bold, Magistrate Holloway continued, and they will require verification. However, if what you claim is accurate, it suggests a level of conspiracy that goes far beyond a single individual's crimes. Ambassador Vex, you will be remanded to custody pending a full forensic review of all evidence. Ms. Thorne, you will remain available for continued questioning. This tribunal is adjourned for recess of 6 hours. The gavel came down with a sound like a world splitting open. Kale was immediately surrounded by guards, but before they could escort him away, his eyes met Seraphine's one final time. In that glance, she saw questions, gratitude, confusion, and something deeper, a recognition that in saving his life, she had fundamentally altered the trajectory of both their futures. The interrogation rooms of Nexus Station were deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. Serafini found herself in one an hour later, seated across a metal table from an official whose species she did not recognize, a being with a face that seemed to shift between configurations, as though she could not quite commit to a single appearance. Beside the official sat Counselor Venn, whose presence immediately validated Seraphine's suspicions about her involvement. You've created a very difficult situation for yourself, Ms. Thorne, Venn said, her voice smooth and controlled. The tribunal was prepared to accept your testimony, to move toward a swift resolution. Instead, you've complicated matters considerably. Serafini said nothing, simply waited. She had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than speech. You know the ambassador, Venn continued, studying her manicured fingernails with feigned disinterest. That is the real issue here, isn't it? You have a personal connection to him. Your judgment is compromised. My judgment is based on forensic analysis. Serafini countered calmly. The evidence against Ambassador Vex is false. That is not a matter of personal opinion or emotional bias. It is demonstrable fact. Facts are interesting things, Ven said, finally looking up from her nails. They can be interpreted in so many different ways. The tribunal will require time to conduct their review. During that time, you will remain on Nexus Station. You will not leave. You will not make any external communications without permission. And you will think very carefully about whether your commitment to abstract truth is truly worth the consequences it will bring. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but absolutely clear. Serafini understood what Ven was saying. By testifying truthfully, she had made herself vulnerable. Ven had power within the galactic administrative structure, power enough to make her life very difficult. She could find herself stripped of her credentials, exiled from her home world, possibly worse, and all of it would be technically legal, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic justification. Is there anything else? Serafini asked, keeping her voice steady. Ven smiled, and it was the coldest smile Serafini had ever witnessed. No, you're dismissed. But do think about what I've said. There may still be time to correct your testimony if you prove cooperative. Serafini was escorted from the interrogation room back to the quarters she had been assigned. The space was small, but not deliberately punitive. A private chamber with a viewport, a sleeping platform, basic facilities. She sat on the platform and stared out at the stars, her mind racing through the implications of what she had done. 6 hours later, there was a soft chime at her chamber door. Serafini straightened, expecting an official or perhaps a guard. Instead, a figure slipped through the partially opened door and immediately sealed it behind him. Kale Vex stood before her, no longer in restraint cuffs, dressed in the dark practical clothing of station personnel. He looked exhausted but alive, and there was something in his eyes that made Seraphine's breath catch in her throat. We have approximately 4 minutes before the next security rotation passes this section, he said quietly. We need to talk. The tribunal has granted me limited movement pending the evidence review, and I've used that window to track you down. Serafini, why did you do that? You had everything to gain by following their script. Why would you jeopardize your own position for me? Serafini stood, and suddenly the small chamber seemed even smaller. They were separated by barely a meter of space, and the air between them felt charged with all the unspoken words. From 5 years of carefully maintained professional distance. Because the truth matters, she said simply, and because I couldn't send an innocent man to his death. Especially not you, Serafini, he began, but she held up a hand. I've been analyzing the falsified documents, Kale, while I was in the interrogation room. They allowed me access to review the evidence for the tribunal record. There's a pattern. Whoever created this frame was thorough, but they made one critical mistake. All of the forged documents trace back through a specific data encryption protocol, one that was only recently deployed within the Galactic Council. And according to the access logs, that protocol was authorized by Counselor Maris Ven personally. Kel's expression hardened. Ven, she's on the Judicial Oversight Committee. She has access to virtually every secure system on Nexus Station. Exactly. And something else I found, there were communications between Ven and to other officials discussing a necessary catalyst to justify increased military spending and more authoritarian control measures. They wanted a crisis. They won. The maintenance tunnel system existed in the spaces between official reality, a network of corridors that had been constructed during the earliest phases of Nexus Station's development and then systematically abandoned as newer, more efficient systems were built. Serafini led Kale through darkness broken only by the pale blue glow of her handheld illuminator, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent weeks studying the station's archival blueprints. Their footsteps echoed softly against walls that seemed to sweat moisture, the air carrying the mineral taste of recycled atmosphere that had not been fully refreshed in decades. The access point to Security Vault 7 is approximately 300 meters ahead, Serafini whispered, though there was no one near enough to hear them. The habit of caution had become ingrained in her, from years of working in sensitive archival environments. After we reach it, we'll need to bypass the security protocols. My credentials should work, but if Ven has already flagged my access, we'll have perhaps 30 seconds before alarms trigger And if the alarms trigger? Kale asked, following close behind her. Then we run. Serafini replied with a grim smile that he could hear in her voice, even if he could not quite see it in the darkness. And we hope that whatever we find is worth dying for. They moved in silence after that, their breathing synchronized with the rhythm of their footsteps. Kale found himself watching the way Serafini moved through the shadows, the way her luminescent skin seemed to absorb and then release the pale light of her illuminator. He had always thought her beautiful during those months they had spent together 5 years ago on the outer colonies, but in this moment, aware of the risk she was taking, the sacrifice she had already made by testifying against the tribunal's wishes, she seemed transcendent. She was everything he had trained himself not to think about. Everything he had told himself was impossible. And now they were fleeing through abandoned tunnels in a desperate attempt to prove his innocence and expose a conspiracy that threatened the entire galactic community. They reached the access point without incident. Serafini placed her palm against the security panel, and for a moment nothing happened. Then a light flickered to life red at first, indicating a security check in progress. Kale felt his heart rate accelerate. If Ven had indeed flagged her access, the red light would begin to pulse, alerting security to their presence. But instead, after 5 interminable seconds, the light shifted to green, and the sealed door hissed open to reveal a small chamber beyond. "We're in," Serafini said, relief evident in her voice. "But we need to move quickly. That access will have generated a timestamp. We have perhaps 10 minutes before the next automated security sweep." The vault itself was a revelation. The chamber stretched before them in rows of data storage systems, holographic displays, and filing systems that represented decades of galactic administrative records. The walls seemed to shimmer with barely contained information, each surface capable of displaying thousands of documents simultaneously. Kale had expected something more intimidating, more fortified. Instead, it felt almost like a library, a place designed for the careful preservation and organization of knowledge rather than its destruction. "What are we looking for specifically?" Kale asked, approaching the nearest terminal. "Communications between Ven and the other conspirators," Serafini replied, moving to a different section of the vault. "Financial records showing how they financed the destruction of Epsilon 7. Anything that links them directly to the crime. And most importantly, evidence showing their motivation. Why would Ven want to create this crisis? What does she hope to gain from destabilizing the galactic community?" They worked in tense silence, Seraphine's fingers flying across holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency, while Kale accessed the communication logs through his diplomatic credentials. After 3 minutes of searching, Serafini made a small sound of discovery. "Here," she said, pulling a holographic display toward her. "Communication logs from 6 months ago. Ven and 2 other council members discussing Operation Silent Justice. That's the code name they used for the conspiracy." Kale joined her, scanning the displayed text. The words made his blood run cold. The plan was even more ambitious than he had feared. Ven and her associates intended not just to blame him for Epsilon 7's destruction, but to use the resulting chaos to consolidate power. They wanted to eliminate the Democratic Advisory Council and replace it with an authoritarian central government that they would control. Epsilon 7's destruction was simply the catalyst, the tragedy large enough to convince the galactic community that individual worlds and species could no longer be trusted to govern themselves. They were going to destroy the colony regardless, Serafini said, her voice hollow. "It didn't matter if you were there or not. You were just convenient, a face to blame, a scapegoat to crystallize the fear that the galactic community needs to be controlled by a strong central authority." "How many knew?" Kale asked. "How many people were involved in this?" "At least a dozen," Serafini replied, scrolling through additional communications. "Military commanders who authorized the weapon deployment, Treasury officials who concealed the financial transactions, security personnel who fabricated the evidence against you. It's systemic, Kale. This isn't just a few corrupt individuals. This is an organized conspiracy at the highest levels of galactic government." They spent the next 5 minutes downloading copies of the evidence onto a secure data crystal that Serafini had brought for precisely this purpose. The files included not just communications, but financial records, weapons system specifications, and most damaging of all, a video recording of a private council meeting where Ven explicitly discussed the necessity of destroying Epsilon 7 and blamed it on human sabotage. "We have what we need," Serafini said, securing the data crystal in a small pouch at her waist. "Now we need to get out of here and find somewhere safe to present this evidence where Ven can't intercept it." They were moving back toward the maintenance tunnel entrance when alarms suddenly began to wail throughout the vault chamber. The red emergency lights burst to life, bathing everything in crimson illumination. Kel's breath caught in his throat. "They know," he said. "They know we accessed the vault." "It's not that," Serafini replied, her voice tense as she checked her portable scanner. "There's a distress signal coming from the diplomatic quarter. Something's happened. K-Earth Command is under attack." The implications crashed over him like a wave. Ven must have realized that Kale was not in his designated holding area, must have suspected that he and Serafini were attempting to gather evidence, and rather than wait for them to complete their investigation, she had decided to eliminate the threat by striking at the Source Earth's embassy on Nexus Station. "We have to go," Kale said, already moving toward the tunnel exit. "There are people there who depend on me. Diplomatic staff, researchers, Earth government representatives. If Ven's operatives have launched an attack, if we go back above, we'll be captured or killed," Serafini said, but she was already following him. "We can't help anyone if we're dead, and I can't let innocent people die because I'm running," Kale countered, reaching the tunnel entrance. "Not again. I won't let Ven claim another atrocity." They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into chaos. The diplomatic quarter was in disarray, security teams moving rapidly through corridors, emergency bulkheads sealing off damaged sections. Kale and Serafini stayed to the shadows, using the confusion as cover to move deeper into the affected zone. What they found was devastating. The Earth Embassy had been targeted with precision weapons, the blast patterns suggesting military-grade ordnance. Bodies lay in the corridors, and the anguished cries of the wounded echoed through the corridors. Kale forced himself to move forward to search for survivors. He found them huddled in the secure vault on the embassy's lower level, approximately 30 people, including the Earth ambassador, a woman named Director Vasquez, who had been coordinating Earth's participation in the galactic peace talks. "Ambassador Vex," Vasquez said, her face streaked with dust and blood. "We thought you were under guard. What's happened? Who did this?" Kale quickly explained the situation, the conspiracy, Ven's involvement, the false evidence. As he spoke, he watched the understanding dawn in Vasquez's eyes, saw the rage and horror at being dragged into such a grand betrayal. "We need to get this evidence to the tribunal," Vasquez said immediately, "and we need to do it publicly, in a way that Ven cannot suppress or deny. She has operatives throughout the station," Serafini warned. "Security checkpoints will be watching for us. We'll never make it to the tribunal chamber." "Then we create a diversion," Kale said, an idea forming in his mind. "Ven has committed an overt act of violence. She's exposed herself. If we can broadcast the evidence we've gathered along with this attack, make it public across the entire station, she can't suppress it without confirming her guilt. The civilian population will know the truth. The broadcast array is in the communications tower," Serafini said, "but it's fortified. We'd need significant resources to break through the security. Then we use what we have," Kale replied, looking at the desperate faces of the Earth Embassy survivors. "Ven has operatives, but so do we. We